Americans visit national parks and somehow find a way to complain about nature being too natural. We are talking one-star reviews because the Grand Canyon was just a hole, formal complaints demanding Yellowstone train their bears, and tourists genuinely asking park rangers if there is an elevator to the bottom of a canyon. These are 69 of the most brain-meltingly stupid national park complaints ever recorded, and every single one of them is real. 1. Picture this. You just dropped a few $1,000s on a family trip to Yellowstone. You drove for hours through Wyoming, paid for the lodge, bought the overpriced souvenirs, and then you sat down and filled out a formal complaint card. Not about the food, not about the rooms. Your complaint was that the park needs to, quote, train your bears to be where guests can see them. This person genuinely expected Yellowstone to run some kind of grizzly bear scheduling program. Like somewhere in a back office there is a ranger with a whiteboard going, "All right, Kevin, you are stationed at Lamar Valley from noon to 3. Do not be late again." 2. The Grand Canyon. 277 miles long, over a mile deep, carved by the Colorado River across 6 million years of geological history. One of the most jaw-dropping natural wonders on the face of the earth. And someone looked at all of that and left a one-star review calling it, quote, a very, very large hole. That is it. That is the whole review. Not a monument to the raw power of nature. Not a humbling reminder of deep time. Just a hole. A big one, apparently, but still just a hole. This person drove hours through the Arizona desert for this conclusion. 3. Okay. So at Yellowstone, rangers have collected years of genuinely unhinged questions from visitors. But one stands above the rest. Multiple tourists, not just one confused soul, but several unrelated people, have walked up to park rangers and asked, "Do you put the animals away at night?" They wanted to know where the bison sleep, where the elk get stored. As if every evening a team rolls out and herds 2,000-pound animals into some underground parking garage, then releases them at dawn like theme park characters clocking in for the morning shift. 4. Joshua Tree. National Park once received a review that said 3 words: hot and boring, too rocky. And honestly, the park's own social media team did not let that slide. They clapped back with, hot? Absolutely. Boring? That is a choice. Too rocky? We do have, like, a lot of rocks. When a federal agency is roasting you in the comments section of Instagram, something has gone beautifully wrong. But seriously, complaining that a desert is hot and rocky is like going to Alaska and being mad about the snow. Every single clue was right there in front of you. 5. Here is one that still lives rent-free in my head. Someone visited Yosemite, stood in the shadow of El Capitan, gazed up at Half Dome, walked among giant sequoias that were already ancient when the Roman Empire fell, and then went home to type these exact words. Trees block views and there are too many gray rocks. Too many gray rocks. At Yosemite, the granite capital of the Western Hemisphere. What were you expecting? A beach? A meadow full of wildflowers with 0 geological features? Those gray rocks are some of the most photographed cliff faces on planet Earth, and those trees blocking your view have been there for 1,000 years. They are not moving. 6. Not every tourist complaint is a review. Some are questions so magnificently stupid that rangers have started writing them down just to cope. At Yellowstone, visitors have asked, "How do you turn Old Faithful on?" And then, as a follow-up, "When does the guy who turns it on get to sleep?" So, in their minds, somewhere beneath the surface of Yellowstone, there is a man living underground, manually operating a massive valve every 90 minutes, day and night, 365 days a year. No days off. No vacation. Just endless geyser duty. Honestly, somebody get that imaginary man a raise. 7. You know what really ruins a trip to the Great Smoky Mountains? According to one very disappointed visitor, it is the complete and total absence of Taco Bell. That was the review. Not about the 6,000-foot peaks. Not about the black bears. Not about the hundreds of miles of trails through ancient Appalachian forest. No. This person drove into one of the most visited national parks in America, surrounded by some of the oldest mountains on Earth, and their biggest takeaway was that nobody could hook them up with a Crunchwrap Supreme. The wildlife, the waterfalls, the misty ridgelines at sunrise, none of that could compete with the void left by a missing fast food franchise. 8. Glacier National Park got a 1-star review that said, "And this is the entire thing. Too cold for me. 3 words. 1 star. Done." Now I want you to really sit with this for a second. The park has the word glacier in its name. Glaciers are, by definition, massive, slow-moving rivers of ice. This is not hidden information. This is not a bait and switch. Nobody tricked you into going to a frozen alpine wilderness. The name itself is basically a weather warning, and yet somehow this person still showed up and was caught completely off guard by the temperature. 9. Multiple visitors to the Grand Canyon have asked park rangers whether the whole thing was man-made. Not as a joke, with full sincerity. They wanted to know who dug it, how long it took, and presumably whether the project came in under budget. Just imagine the level of confidence it takes to stare into a mile-deep, 277-mile long chasm in the earth and assume a construction crew knocked that out. Forget 6 million years of erosion. Forget the Colorado River. In their version of history, some guy with a really big shovel just went absolutely nuts one weekend and never looked back. 10. The Everglades sit at the southern tip of Florida. It is a vast subtropical swamp, one of the most unique wetland ecosystems on the continent, home to alligators, pythons, manatees, and roughly 14 trillion mosquitoes. And someone went there, got bitten, came home, and left a 1-star review that warned the public, quote, "There are bugs, and they will bite you on your face. Not your arms, not your legs. Your face specifically." As if the mosquitoes were targeting them with surgical precision out of pure disrespect. This person essentially filed a formal complaint against nature itself for doing exactly what nature does in a swamp. 11. Death Valley. It is literally called Death Valley. The name is not a metaphor. It is not a cute marketing gimmick. It is the hottest place on the surface of the Earth, where ground temperatures have been recorded at over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet one visitor left a review saying they were shocked by how hot it was. Shocked. At Death Valley, the place where the word death is the first thing you read on every sign, every map, and every brochure. At what point during the trip planning process did this person think, Death Valley, that sounds refreshing? Every piece of information was screaming at you before you even left the house. 12. Someone at Arches National Park in Utah left a review that said, "Delicate arch doesn't look anything like the license plate." That is the standard we are working with now. Not the geological record, not the millions of years of wind and water erosion that sculpted a freestanding natural arch out of sandstone. The benchmark for this person was a tiny image on the back of a car. And Delicate Arch somehow failed to live up to it. You hiked 1.5 miles uphill in the desert sun, stood before one of the most iconic rock formations in North America, and your first thought was, this does not match the metal rectangle on my Subaru. 13. Rangers at Shenandoah National Park have reportedly been asked by visitors where they plug in their hairdryers while camping. Not at the lodge, not at a hotel nearby, at the campsite, in the woods, where the electricity is provided by absolutely nothing. These people packed a hairdryer for a camping trip in the Appalachian Mountains and were genuinely confused when the forest did not offer them a wall outlet. Somewhere out there is a person who looked at a tent, a campfire, and a sky full of stars and thought, "This is great, but my hair is going to be a disaster." 14. One visitor to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park gave it a low rating because, and try to stay with me here, the volcano was not erupting during their visit. They were upset, disappointed, felt like the park owed them lava, as if Kilauea checks the reservation list every morning and fires up a fresh eruption for the tourists who paid full admission. Volcanoes erupt on geological timescales, not your vacation schedule. But this person clearly expected the Earth's molten core to perform on demand like a dinner show at a resort. 15. At Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, a visitor complained that it was, quote, too dark inside the cave. Too dark inside a cave. A naturally formed underground chamber hundreds of feet below the surface of the Earth, where sunlight has not reached in millions of years. What was the expectation here? Floor-to-ceiling windows? A skylight? Should the National Park Service blast a hole through the ceiling so you can get better lighting for your selfies? This is genuinely the most predictable feature of any cave on the planet, and it still somehow caught them off guard. 16. A tourist at Badlands National Park in South Dakota wrote a review that said, there was dirt everywhere. Dirt. At the Badlands. A place that is essentially 240,000 acres of exposed ancient seabed, eroded rock, and yes, an extraordinary amount of dirt. That is the entire point. The dirt there tells a 75-million-year-old story of prehistoric oceans and saber-toothed cats and three-toed horses. But sure, 1 star. Too much dirt. Should they have paved it? Maybe throw down some carpet? Roll out a nice laminate floor across the entire Great Plains? 17. Gateway Arch. National Park in St. Louis is the smallest and most controversial national park in the system. And the reviews are exactly what you would expect. One visitor complained that it was just a metal curve, and there was no nature. They were genuinely upset that a monument made of 43,000 tons of concrete and steel did not offer enough hiking trails or wildlife encounters. It is literally a giant architectural arch in the middle of a city. But this person showed up expecting Yellowstone and left a 1-star review because they found a sidewalk instead of a forest. 18. Bryce Canyon. National Park in Utah got a review from someone who complained the hoodoos, those tall, thin spires of rock that make Bryce one of the most visually surreal places in America, looked creepy and made them uncomfortable. You were uncomfortable. Looking at rocks. Rocks that have been standing there for millions of years, minding their own business. They were not chasing you. They were not whispering your name in the dark. They are limestone pillars shaped by frost and rain. But apparently their vaguely humanoid silhouettes were enough to make a grown adult feel personally threatened by geology. 19. Crater Lake in Oregon is famous for one thing above all else: its impossibly deep blue water. The deepest lake in the United States, sitting inside the caldera of a collapsed volcano, almost 2,000 feet deep and so clear it looks like someone photoshopped it. And a visitor gave it 1 star because they could not swim in it. That was the complaint. Cold water, restricted access, no swimming. You are looking at a volcanic crater filled with centuries of snowmelt at nearly 6,000 feet of elevation, and your reaction is, yeah, but where's the pool ladder? Some places exist to be admired, not cannonballed into. 20. A tourist visiting the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona was reportedly confused about why none of the trees were standing up. They expected a forest, a real, living, vertical forest, with leaves and shade and maybe some birds. Instead, they found 200-million-year-old tree trunks turned to solid stone, lying on the ground across a painted desert landscape. Which is, exactly what petrified means. The wood literally turned into rock over millions of years. But this person apparently skipped both the name and every photo ever taken of the park, and just assumed they were going for a casual walk among the pines. 21. One review of Acadia National Park in Maine complained that the ocean water was too cold to swim in. In Maine, on the North Atlantic coast, where the Labrador Current sends water down from the Arctic that rarely breaks 60 degrees even in the dead of summer. This is the same ocean that sank the Titanic a few hundred miles to the northeast, and you showed up in your swim trunks expecting bath temperature. Acadia is one of the most beautiful stretches of coastline in the country, and you gave it 1 star because the Atlantic Ocean would not warm up for your beach day. 22. At Olympic National Park in Washington State, a visitor left feedback complaining that it rained during their entire visit. It rained. In a temperate rainforest. one of the wettest places in the entire continental United States, where some areas receive over 12 feet of rain per year. The park literally contains the word rainforest in its primary ecosystem classification. Complaining about rain at Olympic is like complaining about sand at the beach. It is the defining feature. It is the reason everything there is so impossibly green and ancient and covered in moss. You did not get unlucky. You got exactly what was advertised. 23. A family visiting the Grand Tetons submitted a complaint that the mountains were too pointy and did not look safe. Too pointy. The Teton Range, one of the youngest and most dramatic mountain ranges in the Rockies, literally named by French trappers for a reason we will not get into on this channel, and the feedback was about their shape being threatening. These mountains rise nearly 7,000 feet from the valley floor in one of the most vertical ascents in North America. They are supposed to look dramatic. That is the whole selling point. But apparently someone felt the peaks needed to be filed down a bit for public comfort. 24. Sequoia National Park is home to General Sherman, the largest tree on Earth by volume. Over 270 feet tall, 36 feet in diameter at the base. This tree was already massive before the Roman Colosseum was built. And one visitor looked at it and asked a ranger, "Is it real?" Not in a philosophical sense. Not as a meditation on the nature of perception. They genuinely wanted to know if the National Park Service had constructed a fake tree and placed it in the middle of a forest full of real trees. As if the government's big plan was to plant one enormous prop among thousands of actual giant sequoias and hope nobody noticed. 25. Zion National Park in Utah received a 1-star review from someone who was angry that the park required them to take a shuttle bus instead of driving their own car through the canyon. The complaint was that it felt communist. A shuttle bus, in a national park, designed to protect the narrow canyon floor from traffic congestion and preserve the visitor experience for everyone. And this person's conclusion was political ideology. Not convenience, not logistics, not crowd management. Straight to communism. Karl Marx apparently wrote extensively about public transit in southern Utah, and I must have missed that chapter. 26. Here is one that rangers at Rocky Mountain National Park still talk about. A visitor asked, quote, "At what elevation do the deer turn into elk?" They thought it was an altitude thing, like there is some invisible line on the mountain where deer just start morphing into elk as they walk uphill. Antlers getting bigger, body mass increasing, full transformation complete by 8,000 feet. In this person's mind, evolution is not a process that takes thousands of generations. It is a real-time upgrade that happens on a hiking trail somewhere between the visitor center and the tree line. 27. A visitor to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, the longest known cave system in the world with over 400 miles of explored passages, left a review complaining that there was not enough to see. 400 miles of underground tunnels, some of them tens of millions of years old, carved through limestone by ancient rivers, and this person walked through and thought, "Meh, needs more stuff." What exactly were you hoping for? Gift shops every quarter mile? A food court at the 300-foot mark? The cave has been forming since before the dinosaurs went extinct, but sure, it is a little underwhelming. 28. The Narrows at Zion National Park is one of the most famous hikes in the world, literally involving walking up a river inside a slot canyon. The photos clearly show people standing in water. The name The Narrows implies a river canyon. And yet, a visitor left a furious review complaining that their feet got wet. They hiked into a river, submerged their shoes in flowing water, and were shocked that moisture penetrated their socks. This is like jumping into a swimming pool and complaining that the towel service wasn't immediate enough. 29. Yellowstone visitors have left reviews complaining that the park smells like rotten eggs. And yeah, it does. Parts of it absolutely reek of sulfur. That is because you are walking across one of the largest active volcanic systems on Earth, where boiling water and toxic gases are constantly escaping through cracks in the ground. The smell is the planet reminding you that you are standing on a thin crust above a supervolcano. But for some tourists, the takeaway was not awe. not respect for the raw power of geology. It was a Yelp review that reads like a restaurant complaint about the appetizer. 30. Wind Cave. National Park in South Dakota is named after the barometric winds that blow in and out of the cave's natural entrance. It is a breathing cave. That is the science behind the name. But one tourist was extremely disappointed and left a review asking, "Where is the wind?" They apparently expected a wind tunnel experience, maybe a hurricane-force gale that would blow their hat off. When the air pressure was balanced and the cave was calm, they felt cheated by the lack of weather inside a hole in the ground. 31. A visitor at Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Ohio left a review saying they were disappointed because they expected something more like Yellowstone. Cuyahoga Valley is a beautiful park with waterfalls, forests, and a scenic railroad, but it is in northeastern Ohio. Not exactly a geothermal wonderland. Comparing it to Yellowstone is like ordering a grilled cheese and being upset it did not taste like a ribeye steak. Every national park has its own identity, its own beauty, its own reason for existing. But apparently, if there are no geysers and no bison, some people just cannot get on board. 32. A family at Denali National Park in Alaska filed a complaint because the park would not guarantee that they would see Mount Denali during their visit. The mountain is visible only about 30% of the time because it creates its own weather system, surrounded by clouds more often than not. This is well documented. It is mentioned on the park website, in every guidebook, and by every tour operator. But this family still felt cheated. They paid for a mountain and demanded to see one. As if the National Park Service could just call up the clouds and ask them to move to the left for 20 minutes. 33. At Dry Tortugas National Park, which is a cluster of small islands 70 miles off the coast of Key West, accessible only by boat or seaplane, a visitor complained that it was too hard to get to. That is the whole point. The remoteness is the feature, not the bug. It is one of the most isolated national parks in the lower 48 states, surrounded by nothing but open ocean and crystal clear water. The difficulty of getting there is exactly why it is not overrun with tourists. But this person apparently wanted a national park at the end of a cul-de-sac with convenient freeway access and maybe a drive-through on the way in. 34. Someone at Congaree National Park in South Carolina, which protects the largest intact expanse of old-growth bottomland, hardwood forest in the southeastern United States, gave it 1 star because the boardwalk was boring and there were too many trees. Too many trees in a forest. Let that settle for a moment. You drove to a national park specifically designated to preserve a forest, walked into said forest, looked around, and your critique was that there were too many of the exact thing the park was created to protect. That is like going to a concert and complaining about all the music. 35. Rangers at Big Bend. National Park in Texas have fielded complaints from visitors who were upset that Mexico was visible from certain viewpoints. The park sits directly on the United States border with Mexico, separated by the Rio Grande, and some visitors were genuinely bothered that they could see another country. Not for political reasons, not for safety concerns, just aesthetically. They did not want a foreign nation in their national park view. As if the park should install a giant curtain along the river so nobody has to acknowledge that geography exists beyond American borders. 36. At Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota, which is primarily a water-based park best explored by boat, a visitor complained that there were not enough roads. The park is over 200,000 acres of interconnected lakes, peninsulas, and islands. That is its entire identity. It was literally established to protect this waterway system, but this person wanted to drive through it. Just cruise around in their sedan through a network of lakes. Apparently, the concept of a park you explore by canoe or motorboat was so alien to them that the only logical response was a 1-star review demanding asphalt. 37. A visitor at Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota complained that the wild horses looked dirty. These are wild horses. They live outside, in the Badlands, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They roll in dust. They stand in mud. They do not have a grooming appointment on Tuesday. These are not the horses from a shampoo commercial. They are feral animals living exactly as feral animals live, and someone looked at them and thought, somebody should really give those guys a bath. The entitlement it takes to critique the personal hygiene of a wild animal is genuinely staggering. 38. At Saguaro National Park outside Tucson, Arizona, a visitor left a complaint that there was no shade anywhere. You are in a desert, in southern Arizona, surrounded by cacti, saguaro cacti, specifically, which are tall and skinny and cast about as much shade as a telephone pole. This is not a park designed for lounging. It is a park designed for appreciating one of the most iconic desert landscapes in the American Southwest. But this person apparently showed up expecting a canopy of oak trees and was personally offended when the Sonoran Desert turned out to be, in fact, a desert. 39. Mesa Verde. National Park in Colorado protects ancient cliff dwellings built by the ancestral Pueblo people more than 800 years ago. These structures are tucked high into canyon walls and are accessible only by climbing tall wooden ladders. And yet, rangers consistently receive complaints from tourists asking, "Where is the elevator?" You are visiting an archaeological site constructed in the 12th century by people who used stone tools and carried water in clay pots. And you are genuinely upset that they did not have the foresight to install an ADA-compliant lift system for your convenience. This is not a hotel lobby. It is a vertical village carved into a cliff face. 40. At Channel Islands National Park off the coast of Southern California, a visitor was upset because there was no cell phone service on the islands, no bars, no data, no Instagram. The Channel Islands are a remote chain of 5 islands in the Pacific Ocean, home to species found nowhere else on Earth, surrounded by some of the richest marine ecosystems on the West Coast. And this person's primary concern was that they could not post a story in real time. You are standing on an island where island foxes evolved in complete isolation for thousands of years, and you are mad you cannot check your notifications. Respectfully, the foxes do not care about your Wi-Fi situation. 41. A visitor at Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park in Colorado, where the canyon walls drop over 2,000 feet in some places and are so steep that parts of the inner gorge receive only 33 minutes of sunlight per day, complained that the canyon was too steep to hike into. That is the feature. The extreme steepness is literally why it is a national park. It is one of the most dramatic vertical landscapes in the country. The name Black Canyon exists because the walls are so steep and narrow that shadows dominate the gorge almost permanently. You are not supposed to casually stroll to the bottom. This is not a mall escalator situation. 42. Virgin Islands. National Park is basically paradise. It is white sand beaches, turquoise water, and coral reefs. But one visitor left a 1-star review complaining that the ocean water was too salty, and it stung their eyes. I need everyone to pause and process that. This person went to the Caribbean, walked into the Atlantic Ocean, and was personally offended by the salinity levels. They essentially wanted the National Park Service to desalinate an entire ocean for their snorkeling trip. Next time, maybe just stick to the hotel pool, because the ocean has been salty for about 4 billion years, and it is not changing for you. 43. Katmai National Park in Alaska is famous for its brown bears, specifically the ones that stand in Brooks Falls catching salmon. These bears are massive, wild predators preparing for hibernation. Yet one tourist complained that the bears were lazy and didn't do enough. They were upset that the bears were just standing there eating fish instead of running around or putting on a show. These animals are consuming 40,000 calories a day to survive the brutal Alaskan winter, but because they didn't perform a circus routine or chase something for your entertainment, they are apparently slacking off on the job. 44. A visitor to Redwood National Park in Northern California, home to the tallest trees on the planet, with some reaching over 370 feet, left a review saying the park was just a bunch of tall trees. Just a bunch of tall trees. At the Redwood Forest, where the entire purpose, the entire reason for the park's existence is tall trees. These trees were saplings when Julius Caesar was alive. They have survived fires, floods, earthquakes, and centuries of logging. They are biological skyscrapers that defy comprehension. And this person reduced them to just a bunch of tall trees, the same way you might describe a parking lot as just a bunch of cars. 45. At Guadalupe Mountains National Park in Texas, which contains the highest point in the state and some of the most well-preserved Permian-era fossil reefs in the world, a visitor complained that there was nothing to do. Nothing to do. You are standing on an ancient ocean reef that is 260 million years old, lifted thousands of feet into the sky by tectonic forces, surrounded by rugged desert wilderness. There are trails that take you through some of the most geologically significant terrain on the continent. But because nobody handed this person a pamphlet with scheduled activities and a buffet line, the park gets 1 star. 46. At Lassen Volcanic National Park in Northern California, a visitor was upset that the park's volcanic features were not as dramatic as what they saw in a movie. They did not specify which movie. Could have been anything. Could have been a superhero film where a volcano launches a city into space. The point is, this person measured an actual, real-life active volcanic landscape against Hollywood special effects and found reality lacking. The park has boiling mud pots, steaming fumaroles, and the site of one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in American history, but it did not have enough CGI energy for this critic. 47. Someone at Isle Royale National Park in Michigan, one of the least visited parks in the entire system, because it is a remote island in the middle of Lake Superior, accessible only by ferry or seaplane, left a complaint that there is nothing around it. Nothing around it. It is an island, in the largest freshwater lake on Earth. That is how islands work. There are no neighboring strip malls. There is no adjacent shopping center. There is water. That is what surrounds islands. This person apparently expected the middle of Lake Superior to have suburbs. 48. Rocky Mountain National Park is famous for its elk population, especially in the fall during the rut, when the males bugle to attract mates. It is a wild, piercing scream that echoes through the valleys. A visitor actually complained to rangers that the elk were screaming too loud and asked if someone could make them stop so they could sleep. You pitched a tent in the middle of an active wildlife mating ground during the peak of the season, and you want the park rangers to go out there and tell a 700-pound bull elk to keep it down because you have an early morning? Good luck with that. 49. At Everglades National Park, a visitor complained that the alligators did not do anything. They just sat there, in the water, being alligators. This person apparently expected the reptiles to perform. Maybe a little synchronized swimming, a few tricks, possibly a choreographed routine set to music. Alligators are ambush predators. Sitting perfectly still for hours is literally their entire survival strategy. It is the thing they are best at. They have been doing it successfully for over 37 million years. But this tourist saw a 200-million-year-old evolutionary masterpiece of patience and said, "Boring. 0 stars." The gator did not even wave. 50. A visitor to Kenai Fjords. National Park in Alaska, where massive tidewater glaciers calve icebergs directly into the ocean in one of the most dramatic displays of nature you can witness, complained that the boat tour was too long, and there was not much to look at. You are watching a wall of ice the size of a skyscraper collapse into the sea in real time. Humpback whales are breaching around your boat. Sea otters are floating on their backs, cracking open shellfish. Puffins are everywhere. And your review is not much to look at. I genuinely want to know what this person considers entertaining. Because if calving glaciers and breaching whales are not doing it, I am not sure anything on Earth will. 51. Someone at Capitol Reef National Park in Utah complained that the park did not have a reef. They thought it would be a coral reef in landlocked Utah. Over 5,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by desert in every direction. The word reef in the park's name refers to a rocky barrier, a geological term used by early settlers to describe the water pocket fold because it blocked travel like an ocean reef blocks ships. But this person packed their expectations for snorkeling, drove 8 hours into the Utah desert, and was devastated to find 0 tropical fish and an awful lot of sandstone. 52. A family visiting Great Basin National Park in Nevada complained that they could see too many stars at night and it was overwhelming. This park is one of the best places in the entire country for stargazing precisely because it is so remote and dark. The International Dark Sky Association has recognized it for its exceptional night skies. Thousands of people travel there specifically to see the Milky Way with their naked eyes, and this family looked up at one of the most spectacular celestial views available on American soil and felt overwhelmed by stars. The universe put on its absolute best show, and the review was essentially too much space. 1 star. Well, technically, too many stars. 53. At Haleakala National Park in Maui, where visitors wake up at 2 in the morning to drive to the summit and watch the sunrise from above the clouds at 10,000 feet, someone left a review complaining that they had to wake up too early. The sunrise at Haleakala is considered one of the most spiritual and breathtaking natural experiences in Hawaii. Mark Twain wrote about it. Astronomers built observatories there because the viewing conditions are that extraordinary. But this person felt that the sun should rise at a more convenient hour, maybe 9-ish, after breakfast. The sun apparently needs to be more considerate of vacation schedules. 54. At Biscayne National Park in South Florida, which is 95% water and protects a stunning stretch of coral reef, mangrove shoreline, and the northernmost Florida Keys, a visitor gave it 1 star because there is no land to walk on. Almost the entire park is underwater. That is the point. It is a marine park. The ecosystems it protects exist beneath the surface of the ocean. This person showed up expecting hiking trails and scenic overlooks and instead found the Atlantic Ocean. The information was right there on the first line of every description ever written about this park. But apparently reading is also an outdoor activity this tourist chose to skip. 55. A visitor to Canyonlands National Park in Utah, where vast canyons, mesas, and buttes stretch out in every direction in one of the most dramatic desert landscapes in the American West, left a review saying, "It just looks like Mars." And they did not mean that as a compliment. They meant it was barren, lifeless, and boring. The irony is that NASA literally uses parts of Canyonlands to test Mars rover equipment because the terrain is so similar. So yes, it looks like Mars. That is arguably one of the coolest things about it. You are walking on terrain that doubles as a stand-in for another planet, and your reaction is disappointment. 56. Someone once asked a ranger at Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska how far apart the glaciers were from each other. And when the ranger explained the distances, the visitor asked if there was an Uber or something to get between them. An Uber. In Glacier Bay, a remote wilderness area in southeast Alaska, accessible primarily by cruise ship or float plane, with no roads, no towns, and no infrastructure beyond a small lodge. The nearest Uber driver is probably 400 miles away in Juneau, and even that is debatable. But this person stood in the middle of one of the last great wildernesses in North America and expected rideshare service. 57. At Arches National Park, a visitor asked a ranger how long it took the park to set up all the arches before opening each morning. They thought the arches were assembled daily, like furniture. Like every dawn, a crew drives out, lifts sandstone slabs into position, carefully balances them, and then takes them down at night for safekeeping. These formations took millions of years to develop through natural erosion. Some of them are so fragile that a strong vibration could cause them to collapse permanently. But in this tourist's mind, it is all part of a daily stage setup that happens before the gift shop opens. 58. A visitor at North Cascades National Park in Washington gave it a low rating because the mountains had too much snow on them. In a park that contains over 300 glaciers, the most of any park in the lower 48 states, the North Cascades have been called the American Alps. Snow is not a side effect there. It is the main character. The glaciers that cover those peaks are the reason the rivers run, the valleys exist, and the entire ecosystem functions. But this visitor looked at all of that and essentially said, "Can someone turn the snow off?" It is really ruining the mountain aesthetic. 59. At Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas, the oldest area managed by the National Park Service, a visitor complained that the thermal water in the public bathhouses was too hot. The park is literally named Hot Springs. The water emerges from the earth at 143 degrees Fahrenheit. This has been documented since the 1800s. People have been soaking in these waters for therapeutic purposes for centuries. The word hot is in the name, on the sign, in every brochure. And yet this person submerged themselves and was startled to discover that the hot springs were, in fact, hot. At some point, the name has to count for something. 60. A visitor at Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska, the largest national park in the entire United States at over 13 million acres, bigger than the entire country of Switzerland, complained that it takes too long to drive through. Too long. To drive through a park larger than 9 U.S. states. A park so massive it contains entire mountain ranges, glaciers the size of cities, and rivers that have never been named. You are not stuck in traffic. You are crossing a wilderness so enormous that most of it has never been walked on by a human being. But sure, they should probably add an express lane. 61. Someone at Yosemite complained that the waterfalls were smaller than expected. Yosemite Falls is the tallest waterfall in North America at 2,425 feet. That is nearly half a mile of water falling through the air. It is visible from miles away. It produces enough mist to soak you from a quarter mile out. And it was not tall enough, not dramatic enough, did not meet expectations. I need to know what waterfall this person has seen that makes Yosemite look small, because it does not exist on this planet. Unless they are comparing it to Niagara, which is actually shorter but wider, which means they were wrong either way. 62. A tourist at Great Sand Dunes National Park asked a ranger whether the dunes were made of real sand or some kind of special material. Special material. Like the federal government developed a proprietary synthetic sand alternative and dumped it across 30 square miles of Colorado just to create a tourist attraction. In reality, these dunes formed over hundreds of thousands of years as wind carried sand from the San Luis Valley and deposited it against the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. But in this visitor's mind, the whole thing was an engineering project, probably contracted out to the lowest bidder. 63. Mammoth Cave. National Park in Kentucky is the longest cave system known to man. But the name causes some confusion. Rangers have reported multiple visitors asking, "When do we see the woolly mammoths?" These people genuinely believe the park is a frozen prehistoric zoo where extinct Ice Age megafauna are kept in underground pens. They bought a ticket expecting to see Manny from the movie Ice Age and were devastatingly disappointed to find only 400 miles of dark, silent limestone tunnels. 64. Gates of the Arctic National Park in Alaska is a vast, roadless wilderness north of the Arctic Circle. It is named for two mountains that frame a river like a gateway. But one visitor complained that there were no actual gates. They traveled to the absolute edge of the map, into one of the most remote places on Earth, and were annoyed that they didn't find a physical iron gate welcoming them to the Arctic. I am not sure if they wanted a turnstile or a toll booth, but the metaphorical beauty of the landscape was clearly lost on them. 65. Grand Canyon. Mule rides are a legendary way to descend into the canyon. You are riding a living animal down a steep trail in the desert heat. And yet, people frequently leave reviews complaining that the mules smelled bad. They are mules. They are working animals covered in fur and sweat, walking through dust under the Arizona sun. Did you expect them to be showered and spritzed with designer cologne before you hopped on? You signed up for a rugged 19th century transportation experience, but apparently, the authentic smell of livestock was just a bridge too far for your delicate sensibilities. 66. Kings Canyon. National Park in California is actually deeper than the Grand Canyon. That is a geological fact. but a visitor left a 1-star review claiming it was not as impressive and felt like a knockoff Grand Canyon. Imagine being a canyon so deep and majestic that you dwarf the most famous landmark in America, and some tourist calls you a knockoff because you don't have the same marketing budget. It is the ultimate case of brand loyalty ruining an experience. 67. Indiana Dunes. National Park is one of the newest parks, located on the southern shore of Lake Michigan. It is beautiful, but it is also surrounded by industry. One visitor left a scathing review complaining that they could see a steel mill from the beach. They were furious that the real world existed outside the park boundaries. They wanted the National Park Service to essentially hang a giant green curtain around the horizon so they wouldn't have to acknowledge that the steel for their car had to come from somewhere. 68. Someone at Mount Rainier National Park in Washington complained that the mountain was in the way of the view behind it. In the way. Mount Rainier. An active stratovolcano standing 14,411 feet tall, the most glaciated peak in the contiguous United States, visible from 100 miles away on a clear day. And someone thought it was blocking the good stuff. Whatever was behind that mountain must be truly spectacular because Rainier itself is considered one of the most iconic peaks in the Western Hemisphere. But no, move the volcano please. This person wants to see what is on the other side. 69. And finally, saving the best for last. A visitor at Yellowstone filled out a comment card suggesting that the entire park would be better if it had less nature and more activities. Less nature at a national park. A place that exists exclusively to preserve nature. That is its only job, the one thing it is supposed to do. 2.2 million acres of protected wilderness, and this person's feedback was, have you considered removing some of the nature and replacing it with things to do? This is not a resort. It is not a theme park. It is the first national park ever established on Earth, created specifically because the nature here is so extraordinary. It needed to be protected from the exact type of person who wrote this review. 69 complaints. 69 moments where someone stood in front of geological wonders, millions of years in the making, and decided the problem was the park, not their expectations. Now here is what I need from you. Drop a comment with the worst tourist you have ever personally witnessed at a national park. I am talking the person who made you lose faith in humanity on the spot. The one you still think about years later. I know you have one. Smash that like button if your brain survived this video, and subscribe so you do not miss the next round of American absurdity.